Okay, Year 11s, we're going to start looking at chapters 4.3 and 4.4. Well, in this video, we're going to start looking just at 4.4, where we're introducing adaptations. So first to our key concepts. So for this topic, we've got our key concepts of describing different types of adaptations, explaining biotic and abiotic factors, how they affect survival of the species, and therefore how they affect the community found in a specific ecosystem. So it's a relationship between adaptations and these abiotic and biotic factors, explaining the condition, how different conditions affect different ecosystems, how they exert specific pressures, and this is what causes these adaptations. We need to be able to list important abiotic components of a specific ecosystem, describe some of the diverse ecosystems observable in Australia, and then also describe stratification of an ecosystem and explain how this may create biodiversity. So those are our key concepts. On to our first topic, which is adaptations. So an adaptation is any trait which provides some kind of advantage for an individual. Typically, adaptations need to be genetic, and this is just because they need to be passed on. It's not enough just to have a phenotypic kind of adaptation, because that's not going to be passed on to your offspring. So for example, if you, for whatever reason, develop very strong muscles, so go to the gym and work out and that sort of thing, this is not as interesting in terms of our ecosystems investigations or in terms of our investigations of adaptations, because this is only a phenotypic or an environmental adaptation. It's not genetic. It's not going to be passed on. So adaptations, we categorize them on three main levels, either structural, so that is they have a physical impact in terms of the size of the body or the shape of the body or something like that. They may be physiological, so that is they're going to be functional, they're going to have some sort of impact on the way the body actually works, or finally they might be behavioral, so they might affect the way that the organism acts in some way. It's important to remember that adaptations will only give advantage in particular conditions. When the conditions change, a trait may or may not still be advantageous, and we'll talk about that in some detail when we go through some examples of some adaptations. So when we're considering these three different categories of adaptations, structural adaptations are just those that relate to the morphology of a species, the shape, size, the structure of their bodies. An example is the complex nasal cavity of a dog. This is able to detect food from a great distance, or it might be the height of rainforest trees to get access to sunlight above the canopy. Physiological adaptations are those that relate to the metabolic or chemical processes of a species, the things that the body is able to do. So this could be antibacterial proteins in tears, or capsaicin, which is produced by chilies to ward off predators. Lastly, behavioral adaptations are those that relate to patterns of activity of a species. Examples of these are courting rituals, nocturnal hunting, and using of tools. These are all behavioral adaptations. So I'm just going to go through a few more examples on the board and just go through how these adaptations impact the individuals involved. So I'm just going to switch to the board now. Here we have our description of a few different adaptations. So you can see I've divided them up into physiological, structural, and behavioral adaptations. Now, if we first look at physiological, we've got our example of lactase, which is an enzyme that produces lactose. Now, an enzyme that allows us to process lactose. Now, this is an advantage because it means that a particular group of animals, so for our example, as humans, we're now able to process milk. Now, we're able to do that from birth, but eventually we do, as a population, we tend to lose that ability, or we may lose that ability. So having this lactase enzyme, which is predominantly, or which is especially prevalent in European countries, so we're looking at people from Europe, so especially the UK, France, and a few of those sorts of countries. This is a very important thing, and it's meant that cows have become a very important food stock, as well as in some countries sheep and goats for their milk. When we look at the production of stomach acid, this is an advantage because it allows us to break down physically and chemically, break down our food further before it gets into the small intestine, which is where we really need to start absorbing those nutrients. So it's an advantage because it allows us to more quickly absorb the nutrition. And then lastly, secretion of antibacterial products in tears. There's an obvious advantage to that. We're able to resist or prevent or reduce the risk of our eyes becoming infected, which obviously is going to be important if we want to be able to see. We were looking at structural adaptations. So the height in trees in a forest, I've already suggested that this might be to increase the amount of sunlight that they get, so this is to reduce competition. Muscles in animals, this is a physical adaptation that allows us to move. That's going to have massive impacts, massive advantage for us, that we're going to be able to be more likely to get food than an organism that isn't able to move. And then lastly, the 4 stomach chambers in cows. So this is an advantage because it allows them to thoroughly digest their grass, the food that they eat or the plants that they eat, before it gets to their small intestine, before they start to absorb it. So very important there. We're looking at some behavioral adaptations. We have singing in birds. So this might be singing to ward off predators, to communicate to other bird species, which may be for mating, for other bird individuals. So it might be for mating if it's the same species, or it might be that they're communicating to their young, or the young communicating to the adults to tell them where they are. Migration of wildebeest, so this is obviously to do with a seasonal change. The water or the rain reduces in one area, the grass dies off, the wildebeest move on to an area with more grass. And then lastly, the death roll of crocodiles. It helps them to, well, they drown their prey so that they're able to consume it more easily. It's very difficult to eat something if it's wriggling around. So those are some examples of some adaptations and a brief description of the kinds of advantages that they give. And that's really important. It's not enough just to have the adaptations, not enough just to classify where the adaptations fit. You also need to be able to justify what's the advantage that they're giving. And sometimes you might need to do so in a specific example. So you might be asked a question about why wildebeest move when the rain levels drop in a particular area. Why do they migrate? And so you will need to not only classify that as behavioral adaptation, you will also need to be able to explain why they are doing it. How is this an advantage? All right, back to the slideshow. So we're on to our last slide for this video, which is where we're looking at our discussion, comparing adaptations. So you need to follow this, descriptions there. So go to the discussion, go to the instructions and follow those, and we'll have that discussion Wednesday next week. That brings us to the end of this video, Year 11s. Once again, can I ask you to please send emails with questions, bring up some questions in class. Make sure you're keeping on top of the questions that we set at the end of each topic so that you're going to be successful coming up to the test.